Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. We are beginning our extended work session, also known as our board retreat here at 5 o'clock. Mike, can you take roll?
Mr. Benford.
Here.
Ms. Crooked.
Here.
Ms. Hoag.
Here.
Ms. Hogartle.
Here.
Ms. Kuttner. Ms. Paoli. I know you're here.
Sorry, I was on mute. Here.
All good, thank you. Mr. Vecchio.
Here.
Vice President Seidel.
I'm here.
President Sangillo.
Here. Mike, can you read the statement concerning open public meetings?
Public notice of this meeting pursuant to the Open Public Meetings Act has been given by the Superintendent of Schools in the following manner. On January 10th, 2020, notice of this meeting was posted on the interior of the school administration offices, 1 Lincoln Avenue, Haddonfield. Written notice was submitted and filed with the Haddonfield Borough Clerk, and notices were faxed to the Courier Post
Did I just lose my
Retrospect newspaper.
All right. Thanks, Mike. So this is our extended work session, and as Adam said, the board retreat. We weren't thinking about renaming it because the retreat has a very different image, I think, than in people's minds than what we do here, right? So that's why we're calling it the extended work session. We're in a crazy time, and we have this entire administrative team's locking down for 3 days, and we have 3 days to lock down next week to try to figure out what to do next. But we're still a school district that has to move forward and have a vision for the future and plan for how we improve and where we want to be and where we want to go. And so that's what a big part of tonight's going to be, is talking about that. Before we get to that, I don't think we've heard about updates for our strategic plans probably in 6 or 8 months. So it probably would have been something we did in the spring. But when things happened, we lost sight of that. It went to the wayside. So I thought we'd start off today just with a 10 minutes or so from each of the 3 people, taking us where we are with the strategic plans and maybe even include a few details of what that might look like or additions might look like in 2021. So Gina, why don't you take SEL first?
Okay, thank you, Chuck. So just so I follow, I'm going to share my screen. So the first thing I want to talk about are some of the things that I'm proud that we accomplished over the past school year with our social emotional learning initiative. We made a very concerted effort through all of our research and planning that the most sustainable way to implement a social emotional learning plan, systemic plan that has lasting impact for our district, is to make sure that we take the time necessary to fully develop and train the adults within the organization on what it really means to be emotionally intelligent. With the idea that it's going to be very difficult to provide training support in social emotional awareness and develop emotional intelligence if our students, if our adults don't firmly understand that skill set and are able to practice it in their everyday lives. And the disclaimer I like to share with people before I talk about this is that social emotional learning is not about students or adults always being happy or always being in a good mood. That's a misconception about SEL. It's not always about treating everybody nicely. If I had to boil this down to its foundation, it's about individuals being in tune with their emotions, recognizing their emotions so they can understand how they feel by labeling their emotions, and then having the ability to regulate those emotions. And through our research, we found an evidence-based framework that we implemented in the past year, and we'll go through some of the implementation steps, but it was out of Yale University, out of their Center for Emotional Intelligence. And the acronym RULER stands for Recognizing, Understanding, Labeling, Expressing, and Regulating Emotions. So that really encompasses our full efforts in what we're trying to develop within all of our faculty and staff in Haddonfield. and then in turn, transfer that to our students. So a couple highlights of what was accomplished in the past school year, and I'll talk briefly about our plan moving forward. So when we gathered a committee of teachers and community members a year and a half ago, at the end of the 18-19 school year, we really took time to do our due diligence and thoroughly analyze what we're doing as a school district, what best practices are out there, what does the evidence tell us, what are top-notch school districts doing, and what's supported by the research. And that led us to the Ruler program. So we made a decision at the end of that 18-19 school year that we were going to formally explore that program. And that involved a 3-person team attending a 2-day conference at Yale University. I was fortunate enough to attend. Dr. Kristen Loren, one of our school psychologists, was in attendance, and 5th grade teacher, retired teacher now from Tatum, Lori Bushy, also attended. And when we came out of that, it was a transformational experience for all of us. And again, I hold myself up as a guinea pig because I'm the person that went into that training kind of with my arms crossed, entirely uncomfortable, thinking that I was going to spend 2 days talking about how I'm feeling with other people. And I tend to be a rather reserved person, at least in my professional life. But what I came out of the understanding about the thoughtfulness that goes into understanding how you feel, understanding your emotions, being able to regulate those emotions, was a profound learning experience for me. So we came back from that training and felt very strongly that it was something that we needed to expand. And again, one of the pitfalls we learned from school districts that with whom we spoke was we didn't fall into the trap of saying, here's the program, let's quickly figure out what it is, and then let's teach it to our students. So that was a significant learning experience for us, and that helped really create our plan. From there, we had a 3-person team at each of our elementary school, each of our 5 schools in the district attend commensurate the standards for parent participation in an evening session. As a middle school principal for years, if I had 20 people at a PTA meeting or when we brought an outside speaker, that was a cause to celebrate. So by doing it remotely, we were able to get close to 90 parents that participated in that session, got lots of positive feedback on that afterwards. And part of our plan moving forward, we're discussing plans to have a more formal relationship with Temple University in training our mental health professionals in district and also working with our students. So what we are projecting is to have our full district faculty and staff complete their year-long training on a path a little more quickly than we first envisioned. The first plan was to have them done by January 2020, then begin the rollout to students and parents. We're hoping to move that up by about 8 to 10 weeks. So begin that rollout, accelerate our training for our teachers, give them time to work through those things and be able to internalize and implement them in their own lives, and then begin the rollout to students and parents around November, December. So that really is the big picture outline that I wanted to provide. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about any of those initiatives.
You know, it's gotten real positive response from the staff, correct? I mean, they don't find us an onerous, burdensome addition to their world. They do find value in it.
So I'll give you a very quick story about that, Chuck. So when Kristen, Lori, and we provided faculty overviews in January, before teachers received any type of training at all. And so one of the things we did, we gathered the high school faculty and staff and the middle school faculty and staff for a joint meeting. And we prepared for that meeting to see people in the audience with their arms crossed, eyes rolling. So we were talking to a high school audience who doesn't always receive change. Well, that's human nature. Change is difficult for anybody. But we anticipated, for whatever reason, that it wouldn't be as well received. But our initial presentation, we received the most positive feedback from our secondary colleagues than we did at any other level. And we received positive feedback all around through calls and emails. And I think the adults in the organization truly appreciated that. For one of the very few times in our profession, we said, obviously, students are at the center of our mission. They're the focus point of what we do. However, we need to take care of our adults first with this initiative before we begin to take care of our students with these new emotional intelligence tools.
All right.
I'd love to comment on that too. The feedback I heard was also just as positive. And Jamie at our instructional action team meeting mentioned the idea of putting emotion back in learning. And I think that was why it had so much power. I think to have your emotions validated, especially in this profession where probably the most famous book is Don't Smile Until Christmas, is really powerful for the teachers. So I think you did a wonderful job, your whole team, Gino.
Thank you. It really would have been like picking low-lying fruit, to pick a program, to roll something out quickly, to do an assembly, to say this is going to be our SEL program. But I have to say, when we talked about this idea of taking up to a year to just work with the adults in the organization, both you, Chuck, Dr. Mussolini, and the board was supportive of that. And that's something I really appreciated, because I didn't know how well that would play, how that would play. Because I'd never want this to be seen as we don't want to get this to our students as quickly as possible. It's we want to do it right, and we really want to build the capacity for this to have a lasting effect for students in Haddonfield for the next several years.
Yeah, I think it's great. I went to the SEL conference for the NJSBA, was it a year ago? And that was one thing they said is the biggest problem with schools rolling out any kind of SEL program is the teachers need to go through it first.
Yeah.
And they can't just start implementing it. It won't be as effective. And so really taking the time to run the teachers through the program, and we'll all benefit from having teachers who have better well-being. So they'll benefit from having gone through the program, and then when you implement it, they'll have a greater understanding of it. So I think it's great that we're taking our time with it.
Thank you.
communicate. When I started teaching, you did it on specifically what they needed through that process. And then we had systemic changes, which I'll talk about in a second. So the learning management systems I've talked about a few times before, but Canvas is the high school learning management system. It's really the gold standard of all learning management systems. It's quite excellent. Google Classroom is the best of the free, and we're using that for grades 1 through 8. Originally, it was grades 3 through 8, but the younger grades 1 and 2 found it to be just as useful for theirs. And Seesaw technically isn't a learning management system. You can kind of make anything you want a learning management system. And for kindergartners, it's very hard to be too sophisticated. And that's the beauty of Seesaw, is that its simplicity and its interactive nature. So about the teacher website process, it was a great way to see how learning happens in this organization. And it's taking on a beautiful circular, flowing style. So the technology facilitators in all the levels created and shared templates. They provided PD. I think one of them had professional development like on a monthly basis on the websites to make sure that anybody who missed out on previous ones could have theirs. And then principals shared all of the other, models as much as possible. So it was meant to help it be consistent and an ease of transition for teachers. We had professional development, and this was teacher leader designed and delivered to help the teachers create websites. And again, it was about improving communication. Professional development towards contemporary learning. We've been focusing on designing flexible learning environments. All across the board, perhaps most explicitly in the high school, February 18th was dedicated just to that topic. And the timing could not really have been any better. Because only a month later we wouldn't even know, but we would need that more than ever. And so on March 16th, I know you all know we had professional development. It was organic. It was also organized. It was just across the board, and it was about as frenzied and efficient as possible. Teachers learned how to do screencasting. They learned more about their learning management systems. They learned about how to make a website, all sorts of tech tools like Flipgrid and Seesaw. Learning management support was going on through February through June. And summer curriculum writing, as I said, we don't have a lot of summer curriculum writing going just because of budgetary concerns, but we have enough, and teachers are able to use this time to create flexible learning experiences. So make adaptations to the current curriculum that they got on the books this past year to make it more user friendly for any kind of environment that we might have to come across in the fall. Common assessments has been a theme we've been working on pretty hard for the last 6 months, including this summer curriculum writing. And the reason we do that is to allow for the collaborative use of data to improve instruction. So all good teachers know that we start with the end in mind, because if we don't know where we're going, we can't really provide good instruction. So if we have common assessments, a common end poll in mind for all of us, it's helpful to have us be able to talk about those things and how did it go? What's the data to show that we did well? Teachers are redesigning units, again, to optimize the new learning schedules. This was done in preparation for the high school new block schedule and also the elementary new schedule. The middle school's been underway with their new schedule, but everyone's still, good curriculum writing really does take quite a lot of time. And so a lot of the summer curriculum writing is around that topic as well. So one example of a high school project that David Reeder's working on is he's creating a group assignment that would work in any environment. He's creating an executive board member of the New Jersey Literary Association. And so the systemic changes also affected our flexible learning schedules I talked about before. And again, that helps with the data analysis process that we want to use because those schedules allow for some collaborative time. That's it for me. Thank you. Was I under 10 minutes? Who timed me?
Sure, I'll buy that for $1. You were under 10 minutes. So one of the advantages of using learning management systems is not just from the teacher standpoint of having a having a location to plan and communicate and present information to students, but it's also for the students to have a common place to get the work done too. So has there been any thought of a role, and I don't know if this is a role in planning or just a role in teaching, of student advocacy or basically student empathy to understand how you do the work in those systems directly affects a student. For an example, you have 6 classes as a high school student, and you have 6 teachers doing it 6 different ways inside the learning management. You know, you kind of almost have to figure out which teacher puts the homework assignment in what area and all the plays. So is some of that training also consistency in using those platforms and not just like the specificity of your your program of study, but really so I'll stop talking and making up words.
I feel like it's almost like you set me up with this question because I should have talked about that, but the focus group study
back to school night, over the years, I've heard multiple times parents have frustrations and that, they want to try to access or check things. A lot of teachers say, go here to check it. But if it's new for them because they transitioned from 8th grade to 9th grade or someone else, they struggle with it. And they almost need it. It doesn't have to be long, but maybe they need a 20-minute introduction to it.
Another great question.
On some work that we probably could have saved you if we had been more thoughtful 7 or 8 years ago.
For Canvas, I'm sorry, just one that made me think, at Camden County College, we started using Canvas Lite, which is essentially what you're saying. It's just fewer options, which you would think would be more problematic when actually it just simplifies the process. So it's really the same. It's just a different choice in the type of Canvas that you offer. And I can pick either one. I can use either one. But I found Canvas Lite to be just easier because you said it's actually counterintuitive, but having fewer options made it much easier for me.
You can start exploring Canvas and be lost for a long time.
You can, and there's just so
And
many options, and then the students get confused because there's so many options. So I guess it creates a more of a systemic approach to Canvas than having. I had stuff all over the place when I first started teaching because I thought, oh, put this here, put this there, but then it made it challenging for them to find it.
I haven't heard of that, so I'm happy to know about it. And I was going to say that's why I don't go to TJ Maxx. Too many choices.
Yeah, exactly, like Home Goods.
Okay, so I'm up next with cultural competency, and I learned a little SEL lesson today because Gino said he didn't have any slides.
Own emotions. The second part of it are explicit classroom-based lessons, 20 lessons per year per grade level. Those are the two major components of the teaching pieces, the ruler tools of emotional intelligence and the standalone instructional lessons that go along with that.
Awesome, very helpful, thank you.
You're welcome.
The final aspect of our strategic plan is cultural competency, and this is one, even though we didn't review it in the fall or spring, we certainly are aware of it and where we were going with it, and maybe we learned some lessons off of this one because I believe we had a good approach. We worked with Shelley she's no longer with Case, it's now Peer. They've changed the name of the program she's with. And our philosophy was to educate from above. So you educate the administrators and the teachers. You look at the curriculum, but a key part of this all is giving students voice. And there are the two ways we were approaching this model. And we were pretty successful with it. But I think what happens in a lot of programs, and it happened here, is we're going along pretty well, and we got satisfied with where we are because things were going well. The peer bias group in the high school was doing well. We had our entire curriculum reviewed by Rowan graduate students. We had all those things in place, but it was just moving along. And I think when we have plans like these, it's important we kick ourselves in the butt every once in a while and just jumpstart them again, right? And get them moving in a more aggressive position. And we got jump started again, not by our own planning, but we certainly did. And I think we learned a lot in that. One of the big things we learned is we were spending a lot of time admiring our successes, right? We could print out pages and pages and pages of what we did. And in the end, what we heard was you sound defensive, and we did, because we weren't looking forward to what had to happen next. But there were good things that were happening next. The high school, Hamisi, put together a summit between 4 high schools to come together and have a cultural competency day where the kids were coming together and going to share. School got canceled. That didn't happen. But one of the things you saw with our philosophy of giving students voice, a couple things. Number one, the peer bias group is one of the largest one of the clubs in high school now. It has grown to 60 or 70 people. It was 12 or 13 when it started a few years ago. The South Jersey Voices, the South Jerseys for Black Lives Matter, that was Haddonfield students filling the plan that we had, which was connect with other schools So that way it wasn't just a Haddonfield experience, but a communal experience. They did that. Like, so they understood what we wanted to do. And Hamisi's plan was washed away because of COVID. But the students didn't let it go away. They really went out and they made that passion. They found their passion. They went out and they made that group, and they're very active in the group. They're doing a great job. We still have to work. We're still working with Shelley and Pierre, not Case any longer. She's still got to come back and give us our inventories. We took those inventories that we were supposed to get back in the spring. We never got back. That's coming around. And you know, the other thing you see involved now is Shelley started a Facebook group of her peer group, of the peer realm. And if you go on there now and you join the group, 10-15% of it's Haddonfield kids, teachers, staff. So they really we are seeing that progression forward. That I also think that you saw in the last weeks with our unfortunate yearbook incident and those things, that the approach taken by the administration, and hats off to Tammy. I mean, she put herself out there. She did what she knew was right, knowing she was going to be criticized, but because she said, we can't stand here and say this is what we believe if we're not going to act on this. And so she did. And I think that came from the work we're doing. I think it came from the town hall meeting. And I think it's something we may have handled differently 10 months ago. I'd like to think not, but somewhere inside of me, I believe that may be the case. The fact that not one owner of a yearbook complained or pointed it out, but it was us who found it and pointed it out and acted upon it because it was the right thing to do, I think says a lot about where that's going. The middle school and elementary school are still moving forward. They're doing the one school, one book, all of them dealing with diversity and appreciating diversity. A lot of work in Colleen's world is coming up as the LGBTQ curriculum has to be initiated. So those things are all going well. And we've had these incidents, right? And so we're sad about them, but I think we were not prepared for them. Is not the right word, because you can't be prepared for it. But we certainly understood, I think, better. I know I understood better what was going on and why we have to have the town meeting and why we have to do these things than we did before. And I think most of our students and our staff would say the same thing. The one thing I have to do next is find someone to take my place as the chair for this. So that's another thing we have to look forward in this. But we're going to continue to work with Shelley. You know, our history curriculum took a big hit. I would say not an unfair hit. I don't know that there's a curriculum in an American high school today that ours is imbalanced one way, but the examples given were completely imbalanced the other way. So I don't know what school. We asked Shelley to tell us, where's a school that has that balanced curriculum that gives that voice to the people of color better than ours does. Because history classes, and I know Colin's a former history teacher, they tend to be textbook driven more than other classes. And Jamie, you talked about it before too. If you change it to a thematic approach, right, rather than a chronological approach, you can get deep into some of those things. But I haven't seen that history book yet. So there's some of the challenges ahead of us. But our intention is to continue to get better.
Hey, Chuck, can I ask you a quick question on that?
Sure.
If you guys don't have the answer and you have to get back to me later, it's no big deal. I just thought maybe between you, Gino, and Colleen, somebody knows it. Way back in January, I sent a New York Times article to the Board of Education big email address. So I don't know if Gino and Colleen saw it at the time because they're not on that. But it was an article about how different states within the United States, about how textbooks are basically written. And basically you have authors and writers that send it to places like Pearson and McGraw-Hill, and then state boards like California New School Association Board and Texas, they'll actually make changes to it based on what they feel is appropriate. And the article gave specific examples about how different things like racism, sexism, right to guns, the various amendments in the Constitution, about how they were portrayed, in particular in Texas versus California. I was thinking about that. How do we know what version we have in New Jersey, how much it's been altered, and more importantly, do we have a choice as a school district, or are we mandated to follow what New Jersey school boards tends to advise? And I'm probably comfortable with what it is. I just want to be able to articulate that when people ask us.
So one of the things that you see, and this is, we do look at this, we look at textbooks, Heather, is what states do adopt them. Some, New Jersey does not adopt a textbook, but like you say, California and Texas do, right? So they say, this is a textbook, this is what we want to use, and that happens. When we look at our process, we certainly tend to look at California rather than Texas. I think that's that's just the mindset we have, or I should say I have. We are given standards to meet with our history curriculum. And within their standards, there is room for variance. There is room for flexibility within them. And that's one of the problems. That's one of the problems if you look at, now we're talking curriculum, we're talking the culture, but it's part of it. When we study World War II, right? And I'm teaching World War II, and Gino's teaching World War II, and Dave's teaching World War II, in 3 rooms right next to each other. Depending on what you like about World War II, what you are interested in World War II, like something, you're getting 3 different lessons, even though they're in the same chapter in the same textbook. Because one's going to focus on battles, one may focus on the Holocaust, one may focus on another. I can't know the topic, but that happens, and that's where we have to become more consistent in our expectations for how there is the same curriculum being delivered in every single room. And you know, I'm as guilty as anyone for that, Heather, because English teachers are really known for that, right? So I'm reading Catcher in the Rye, you're reading Catcher in the Rye, and someone else is doing it. I might like this character, focus on this aspect of Catcher in the Rye, and the other teacher next to me might even focus on that, might even talk about it, but has a whole different focus. And that's a challenge, less of a challenge in history, because in English, you're teaching skills about inferencing and all those things, whereas in history, you're dealing more with what happened.
Well,
Chuck,
I think that
I just want to say my question was, I just want to reiterate it. I'm glad you provided that background. That was great. But I guess my question is, do you as educators, are you aware, you know, you said New Jersey doesn't adopt a book. So it seems to me like we have a choice in which book we use. And I guess other than using what's nationally approved, right, I guess you're just taking what's nationally approved without alterations. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
And I would like to add to that and just say that the history teachers are really focusing more on primary sources. So you kind of can't go wrong with the primary sources. It's like the difference between getting, you know, a lean cuisine versus getting all the ingredients to make a lean cuisine. You know, the primary sources are really all we need. The textbooks are this nice extra supplemental thing to make our jobs a little bit easier. But I would say our teachers don't really rely too heavily on the textbooks and more on the primary sources. And that's the way it should be.
Yeah, that's what I was actually going to speak to also. So the work Jonathan Maxon is doing as far as the project-based learning, when you take the primary sources, they, and I also think that this is really when, you know, and I agree, I think some of the criticisms of the history curriculum, I think they were harsh in that I think we're teaching a lot of it. I think a lot of the things we want is for students to develop the empathy and the relatability of the history rather than have it too factual. And that's the difference between a textbook and a primary source. And if you're reading a slave narrative or if you're reading a journal entry, students are able to infer it for themselves. And so the source of the textbook and the editor of the textbook become a non-issue, and it really becomes a student kind of discovering that for themselves. So the more we get into the project-based learning too, the more students can self-select primary sources. And when we have the internet, we have so many options. So I do think that the more we dive into that primary source and PBL, that we can really kind of help mitigate some of the situation that happens when we do have a textbook.
Just as an aside, I think we're doing a better job now, but our curriculum and our books lag behind the times. AP government used the exact same primary source books for 7 years. Like, I don't know if they changed it this year, but think about what's changed culturally in 7 years in government. So I think that's another thing is to look at, is that, it's the same about updating curriculum plans.
All right, I promise I won't keep butting in, Chuck, but
That's
Susan,
right.
this year is a social studies needs assessment review year, so your timing is just right on. You're right. This is what we're going to be focusing on all year.
May I ask a quick question? Can I just confirm we have the Amistad curriculum and Holocaust curriculum have all been implemented, right? Or we're up to date on that?
That's right, Lynn. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions about
can-
that?
Well, it's not a question. It's just pointing out to my fellow board members two things. One, we do approve the textbooks. They're on the agenda. And, it's pretty easy to do a little bit of research to see from a volume which one is being selected. So, it's a little bit of board homework if you're so inclined. And then the second one, it's no different than the way Chuck described 3 history teachers teaching the same lesson, but focusing on their area of interest or expertise. Heather, I would challenge you that if you're asked a question about curriculum or the specific content of a textbook, that you send it to the administrators, the principal, or the teacher in question, because we are not in a position to answer those questions. We should stick to our chain of command and address issues, steer people to address issues to the appropriate person instead of taking on the onus of answering a question themselves, because all 9 of us will give a different answer.
Dave, I always follow the chain of command. You'll have to tutor me on the side. I have no idea of how to look at a textbook and see what has possibly been altered for my state. So I think that was perhaps a random suggestion, but I'd like to go to my administrators who know what they're presenting in their curriculum and hear it straight from them because they're the experts. But thanks for the suggestion.
No, I'm pointing out that you said when I'm faced with answering those questions, I want to know. And I'm saying you don't need to. You need to know the chain of command. That's all. And this isn't a criticism. This is just that I don't want you to get yourself in trouble answering a question and you're not qualified to answer.
Yeah, and I always recommend.
And this burns us as a board. So I'm just saying it burns us as a board when we continue to try to answer questions that we shouldn't.
I'll take it under consideration. Thank you, David.
Sure.
Okay, that's where we're in the process of going. But as I said, even though it's a crazy school year, we have to look for how we're going to build for the future. And you've heard me talk about this before. We saw this in action up at Bronxville High School. And it's something I really believe we need to move forward and in the future and take on this fall. I'm looking for. Can you see my screen? Hello?
Yes, we can see your screen. Profile of a graduate, Chuck. Yes.
Profile of a graduate, yes. So we saw this up at Bronxville. We actually saw they were in the process of doing it. But I've seen other school districts that have done it. One of which is Robbinsville. I interviewed there a few years ago, and they had what they called Robbinsville Ready. And when you talk to people, like even second and third graders, they all knew what Robbinsville Ready was. And they had an idea of what they wanted to be, what it was expected to be as they went through. And it really became a focus for how the expectations for the kids, and it drove what the curriculum instruction should look like, and it helped them make decisions. So you start off with trying to define what do we want our graduate to look like? What's the profile of a kid we want to come out of Haddonfield? After they're here for 12 years, 13 years, what do we look for? And they start with real simple questions. And the whole thing about this process is it's not content driven. It's capacity driven. It's driven on, in the end, what skill sets do we want them to have, not what data or what they've memorized over the last 13 years. So you start off with the hopes and aspirations that your community has for your young people. What does Haddonfield value, right? Because that's part of what we're looking for. So if we're in charge of helping to develop our students to become what we want them to be, we need to know our community values. So that's an important part of this. Then you think about what skills and mindsets you need to succeed. And you can't ignore the rapidly changing world. And then the implications for design and learning experience provided. So if we know we want our children to be this type of person, and we know to succeed as that type of person, they need these skills. What does our instruction look like? And is it giving them the tools to provide the skills? What it does is it helps to develop a true north for the district. It's not a mission statement or a vision plan or strategic planning. It's specifically directed at the children, not the global work of the district. So the profile, and almost every one of these, you end up with a visual, right? It comes up, there's a it documents the specific cognitive, personal, and interpersonal competencies we want them to have. So you drill down, you say, these are the things we value as a community. These are the things we value as a school. These are the competencies that we think they need. Therefore, what do we have to do as a school district to get them to be that person? And this visualization of this, it gives clarity. It gives priority for goals and teaching instruction. And it helps to communicate the goals very clearly to the parents and teachers. So if we have a graduate in our profile that says we want them to be able to be collaborative workers, and you're really doing more group work, you're doing more of that collaboration, and people ask, well, why? It's like, well, this is what our graduate wants to be. This is what we have decided as a community we want our students to be able to do. It answers those questions very clearly and in a very simplistic way so people can understand it. And then once you have these competencies together, you have a shared vision for the district, because we all know what we all want all of our students to be able to have. You start off with reflection questions. These are similar to the first ones. What are the most important cognitive capacities we should underpin in our students' learning across their classes? And what personal capacities are valued most at home and school? What interpersonal competencies are most essential for collaboration? So you're really getting down to those three areas again. What do they need to understand skill-wise? What do we value? And then how can we get it to them? How does this happen? It's an action team type of thing. It's a community group coming together. You create a representative and inclusive advisory board. We would probably hire out someone to come and facilitate this for us. There are groups that do this all the time. They come in, they'll ask what's happening in your school today, and all the teachers will say, this is what's happening, and you go out and you look and say, is that what's happening in school today? You survey people about what they want to see. So you bring in students, teachers, parents, administrators, representatives from the broader community to say, this is about what the community of Haddonfield values, and therefore the school district should be nurturing. Once you have that, you identify those skills they need. I said you create visuals. It's a room full. When we were watching it in action at Bronxville, it was a giant room, a very big room. And I can't tell you how many sticky notes were teaching style from lecture to project based, because our profile of a graduate when we profiled a graduate, it wasn't someone who could sit and listen and memorize. That's not what we wanted. We wanted someone who could think and collaborate and communicate. That's why you do these things. It helps really drive that home. And I would like to start this year. I'm going to start this year. So here's the timeline for it. We'll be doing a September launch. We'll identify a facilitator and get the group together and start working. Through October and November, we'll have meetings, create multiple profiles, right? Because you're going to find that there are going to be differences in this. In our minds, because of who we are and our job, a way to get there, because we understand what they need skill-wise, and we'd also have a way to have common language about what we value in our students. And that's one of the projects I'm going to take on is starting in September. It's something I think is really valuable, and it's something that I think we need to move forward with. Any questions about that?
Other than saying that sounds good, Chuck, it reminds me of, I guess, even before I was on the board, there was the concept of the path to success, and it started in 7th grade. And they talked about the progression of a Haddonfield student from 7th grade through their graduation in 12th. Sorry if I'm roboting a little bit.
It was like that, I think the twist on this is the path to success is.
Chuck,
Yes.
you're doing that, I think you have to exit and enter again.
Oh, okay. I'll be right back.
He was about to say who's Luke's father was. Come on, I'm on the edge of my
I was
seat.
just going to say that, Darth Vader.
You know, that is going to be one of my favorite audio clips when we're done this whole pandemic. That must be the 12th time that has happened on the call with Chuck. I love it.
But then I think the path to success kind of took the kids through what we had in place.
Yeah.
I think the idea of this is, no, we want as Colin just said, we want the end product first to figure out how to get there.
Right.
And
We
I think
want the
that's
why,
difference.
not the how, right? Like, yeah,
Correct,
sure.
yes,
Okay.
exactly.
No, that sounds great.
Yeah, I think it sounds great. I'm excited about it.
I had a question, maybe a little in the weeds, but a strategic plan is generally the shelf life. It's like 5 years. You do this thorough strategic plan, and then you come up with goals that you can tweak, but they're based on the community's input and the community's interest. Did they give you a timeline for this? Like, how often do you revisit it? What's the cycle?
I think it cycles too. I think as the competencies change and you see that change, that's when you recycle it through.
Okay.
All right, Colin, you're going to talk about project-based learning?
Yes, please. Thank you. All right, it's 6 o'clock. I promise not to share my screen too much next time. All right. Project-based learning is near and dear to my heart because, and I think it, the more you know about it, the more it would be, near to dear to your heart as well. That explains why Jamie likes it so much. She's in an education background. I'm going to explain what PBL is, the design thinking that's inherent in it, and some entry points that we have made, the headway we've made already. And I'm going to make the case that now is the time, and we're really poised nicely to get moving. So we would like to shift towards a more authentic learning experience for our students. A definition of project-based learning, it's a method that engages students in learning important knowledge, relevant knowledge to them through extended student-influenced inquiry process. It engages authentic questions, and it ends in a product of some sort that is shown to the public. So there's a public audience component to it. Problem-based learning is often used synonymously. I use it interchangeably because to me, the heart of it is the same. It's student-centered inquiry is at the heart of both of those. The theoretical underpinnings, Jean Piaget, that you all might remember from your college days, talked about how learning and knowledge is built in our minds through our experiences. So learning is physically a change in the brain that happens through our experiences. Well, Seymour Papert out of MIT built on Piaget's work by extending it and saying that learning is constructed through something that is physically made and shown publicly. So some more about what PBL is. It's a real world connection. It has to be an authentic problem that drives the curriculum. It's core to the learning. And this is when people think and talk about project-based learning, a lot of times they'll think of this like fluffy activity that involved construction paper after a project was over. But that's not really it. That's project-oriented learning, but project-based learning is where it's core to the learning. The project is the content that they're learning. There's structured collaboration. That means that there's group roles, there's ongoing formative assessments, including checklists, there's student menus, there's to-dos. So there's always a structure to it to keep the students on task and driven towards a goal. So it's student driven. The teacher is the coach. The teacher brings the student in at every level at all times. So the student is like a co-creator of the design. The teacher redirects the student, never tells the student, this is where you need to go, but just kind of points the way, gives hints, but never answers. So this is a break from what I grew up with my learning. So it's multifaceted assessment. There's assessment going on at every level. It's integrated through formative check-ins, student self-assessment. It's tied with the structured collaboration. So that collaboration usually has an assessment component to it. And research, it's research-based. The students are always engaged in trying to dig and find the answers. A lot of times that research means calling on people in the community if possible. And so this is why I feel that Haddonfield is truly blessed in that there's such a rich, pocket of knowledge everywhere you turn, to be able to research with. It's about deep transferable learning. It's about creating problem solvers and collaborators. And these students who engage in this process do as well or better on high stakes tests. This is just a visual of what it's not, just to disabuse anybody of that old memory of the diorama that maybe didn't make any sense. And to me, it fits in just beautifully with our strategic goals. The thing that they all have in common is others. Cultural competency is about listening to others. Social emotional learning is about relating with others, and contemporary learning is about working with others. And so if you think about which is better for social learning, and I just want to take a break and say that every single community, student, teacher research that I did this year, or even since I started at Haddonfield, involved some component of holding up social learning as the best of the best. And so this idea of, especially with our foray into remote learning, parents are really yearning for, I want my students engaged with the teacher. I want them engaged with the other students in the class, with small groups as much as possible, because that's where the real magic happens. So if we think about what we don't like about traditional learning, it's because it's isolating. The student is getting, content delivered to them by one person. They're practicing individually, usually, to try to memorize the facts. Other people to help you figure out what the problem is, and also solve the problem, and also make the solution. And then there's always some sort of a solution that's published or shared. It's meant to be authentically usable. So it's powered by social learning, and it's student-driven, real world. This is just to break down some of those components I talked about. And this is a picture from Lauren, I believe either Courtney Baker or it's Lauren Pasanik's classroom. And they were exploring the idea of why not everyone wears a helmet. And so that's an authentic problem that they could all get behind. And they were asking this police officer, questions pertaining to that. This is another example of how it's student-driven. These are student-created research questions, and this was used on a gallery walk. And so if you've ever done a gallery walk, students walk around the classroom and look at each other's work and comment on it and interact around it. So it's highly social. There's structured collaboration where students are trying to solve the problem together. In particular, this problem was trying to figure out what kind of data would truly convince kids that helmets are useful to wear. And I'm only going to show a minute and a few seconds of this to show what multifaceted assessment looks like. So a lot of times in traditional classrooms, you think of like, I want to write a definition to this really interesting, hard to remember fact, but assessment can come from lots of strange areas. And to me, this is a really great connection to Gino's work with the social emotional.
Each hat has a color, right? Red is a feeling. Who can give me a red hat for this?
When I first saw this, I thought about volcanoes because of like all the orange. I think it seems really interesting.
Okay, so it draws you in.
Having critique in the language be school-wide, it builds consistency for the students. We're able to walk into any class and say, give me some green hat feedback on this. They also see the value in it after they've gotten feedback from their peers, and they say, oh, okay, I can make this better. The mission of our school is for students to learn how to be successful in the real world. So critique is something we value a lot, having to accept feedback as well as give it. So the 6 thinking hats is a protocol for giving feedback. Students have this common language that they learn. Yellow is what is working. Black hat, it's what's not working. The green hat is a suggestion. Red hat is a feeling. It's a gut reaction. Blue allows you to change between hats. And then white is a clarifying hat.
You get the idea, but you can imagine how powerful that would be in a classroom as a student to be able to give that kind of feedback and to get that kind of feedback. It's a lot less, it's a lot more useful than just say a red mark on a test, which was again what I grew up with. Okay, so should I pause? Any questions?
I actually, Colleen, I want to make a comment because this does tie directly into the work, into the SEL work. And I have always been a very impassioned fan of project-based learning. So I am thrilled to see that we are taking on this work. I've also been a firm believer that before you try to provide a solution to something, people have to understand that there's a potential problem. So part of the survey data that we did in the social emotional learning that we collected in November asked students the question about the degree to which they feel engaged with their schoolwork. And it may or may not be surprising that 27% of the students surveyed at the high school provided a favorable response indicating their level of engagement with their instruction. At the middle school, 29%. Now, we're talking the vast majority of our students are telling us that they are not responding favorably to the level of engagement when they're in school. And you contrast that with the elementary schools where an average of 70% of our elementary school students responded favorably when asked about school engagement. So I just think that that's powerful baseline data that we have.
That's really, really helpful and impressive that you have those stats right off the top of your head, Gino. So thank you. And practice, I swear. So I really thank you so much. And multifaceted assessment, just a little bit more about that. It's about growth towards a goal. And again, when we think of traditional, like Gino was just talking about, engaged, traditional learning is not, I do not hear the idea of engagement with traditional learning. It's competing against my classmates in a maybe, secretive, competitive way. But this is more like we're all working towards something, together. Maybe we're not working towards the same goal together, but it's about getting to a goal, and that goal is tangible, palpable, shareable, and useful. And so this is kind of a rubric of all rubrics to show you what a project-based learning rubric should look like. And it's about meeting. It's about, getting to that goal. Meeting is the criteria is derived from the standards. So it's real, measurable, tangible, usable. And it's about progression.
Hey, can I ask you a question?
Please.
Is the level of effort usually commensurate with the grade that somebody would get in this? I mean, and does that question even matter? Because typically you think of somebody studying for 100 question multiple choice, and you're like, well, you know what? Somebody that got 100, whether or not they actually learn anything that's going to be useful in their life, they clearly put in the work to learn it. So is it typically the same here? The level of effort is commensurate with your grade, or not necessarily?
I love that question. I don't have research to back it up. I have classroom experience using it as a teacher, and something that I noticed that was odd was that students who had mastered the game of school struggled a little bit with it, because usually if you've mastered traditional learning, it's like it comes easily. You remember things that are told to you. You spit it out. But this is more about working with others to try to figure things out. So it's almost like a new type of challenge. And yes, the grade is commensurate with the challenge. I can't say, comparison wise, with traditional definitively, but your grade is commensurate with your effort. Thank you.
Justin, one of the things I was just going to speak to Justin on, I use this in my classes, and one of the things that I love about it is it rewards your willingness to take risks and revise and go back and redo. And it really takes away that definitive idea that I'm finished, because it's a process in nature. It does a couple things. One, it teaches great time management. Those kids that have good time management skills usually are rewarded in a plan like this, because it gives them more opportunity. Would you think so too, Colleen? Like, it gives them more opportunity to go back and revise and to work through it. It also really promotes lifelong learning, because I think this is how we as adults, and I think that's a value of Haddonfield families, is to continue to educate yourself, and it does teach them that independence. One of the things I think, at least what I find in students, and again, it's just anecdotal, but autonomy is probably your one of your greatest indicators of success, and which is great, because they learn to work autonomously and independently, which means you self-critique and you self-revise. And a lot of it isn't me, like the teacher saying, go do this. It's the student kind of looking into themselves and saying, well, what can I improve on? And then doing it. And like what Colleen was saying, where they're working together. So I think the idea of grades comes from more of a cumulative approach to the project, as opposed to a definitive, you did it once and now you're done and this is your grade.
Thank you.
I mean, what do you think, Colleen?
I think that you couldn't have said it any better, and that leads into the design thinking behind it. But are there any other thoughts or questions before I go on?
Well, I just wanted to point out from the language that Jamie was using that it kind of builds on what Chuck was talking about, the ideal Haddonfield graduate. Just some words that popped out just from what she said: autonomous and group-based lifelong learners. You know, like they sound like characteristics of a Haddonfield graduate, just in my book. So should it be something that we keep in mind as we're listening to some of these things, that exercise is starting to kick off, and we should get accustomed to just kind of how we tie activities towards our 3 strategic goals? Would we be tying specific languages or efforts that are going to be into not only the strategic goals, but then the Haddonfield, the ideal Haddonfield learner? And I think we got to come up with a good name for that, so we can hang our hat, black, blue, red, purple, anything we want on.
I like that so much. Thank you. So the idea that Larry's talked about it a number of times, you know, the idea that you're meeting, which is like, great, I'm there, that's what I wanted. You're approaching is like, I'm almost there. Oh, like Jamie just talked about, this idea that I didn't quite make it. Well, why didn't I? There's a motivation for going back and trying to improve it. And then the not yet. Again, it's not about pass fail. It's not about the fixed mindset. It's much more growth mindset oriented, where I'm not there yet because it wasn't quite for me. It wasn't quite what I needed, and I didn't approach it correctly. So this is just a detailed version of what I just showed you. And these are just some visuals. I'm going to share this in the board report, just because I wanted you to have, more detail to be able to refer back to. These are the design elements and the teaching practices of problem-based, project-based learning. But like Jamie was saying, design thinking is at the heart of it, and it's about dynamic, continuous improvement. Everything that you're doing is ill-structured, which means that there's no real solution to it. If you think of, Lauren's problem with the kids aren't wearing helmets, well, there could be a million solutions to why that's not happening. So it's an ill-structured problem that doesn't quite have a solution, but yet we have wants and we have needs to get that solved. We have entry points right here in Haddonfield. We have a lot of teachers who are already doing it. There are teachers who've been doing it for quite some time, and we can build off of that at every level. The planning, the big ideas for the planning is that it always has to have a driving question. We need to look at our curriculum and think, what questions can we frame from it? And we need to think about mapping a project collaboratively. And this is where, professional learning communities really helps, having those grade level leaders and the teacher leaders at the middle and the high school to be able to lead some of that collaborative work in thinking about the assessments. What do we want at the end of this unit? And that's the heart of that is understanding by design. And that's, Grant Wiggins, and it's the idea we've been talking about a few times, is that understanding by design means that you always start with the end in mind first, and then you fill in the rest. And so managing the process is about scaffolding and assessment. And this is just a typical way that teachers sometimes would manage that process. And this is just a little hokey, it's well begun is half done. And this is an Aristotle quote that Mary Poppins apparently used a lot. And this is the idea that, we already have the inroads. In the high school, the environmental science, classes are already doing project-based learning. Arts in the Courtyard is a perfect example of project-based learning. The kids are expoing their work and they truly believe in it because it matters to them and they want to make a change in the world. The middle school is doing those open sci units that I touched on today. Mardi Gras in the middle school is a great example of it, where the kids are learning all about the culture and the words and the language, and they're making something to show it off. The lit installations, the new work that's been happening in the tech classes. The elementary school, the second grade did Project Destination, where they actually had a contest to see which animal should be better. So, but these are just role models that we have, and this is just a sampling. There are a lot of other examples that I can't, list them all, but we have pockets of it happening, but not everyone knows how to do it yet. And it's not across the board. So now is the time. Things will never be the same as before COVID, and that's not all bad. I think this is one of the good things that we can leverage from that. September, one of the things on the agenda today is Rutgers Center for Mathematics and Science Education is coming in to do professional learning. We had vetted, like Chuck said, a number of companies, and we looked at Project Works, which is formerly Buck Institute, and they're really like the parents of all project-based learning. They know the most about it, but the cost, for the cost, we were able to get 4 times as much for our buck and much more personalized. So we're using Rutgers, and they're going to come to the administrative retreat and teach us a lot more about the fundamentals of project-based learning. And then they're going to teach the teacher leadership team in September how to make some of those curricular changes. And then hopefully by November, each grade level or department will have one draft of one project-based learning unit that they'll be able to try out this coming year. And then by June, we'll have data from which we can look at the process and see how do we do and where can we go from there? How do we improve? And that's all I have. Any questions? Did I go over? No, 6:20.
Yeah.
Perfect.
You're great.
I
And
just
there was a
want to
lot
say
of
thank you,
information there
Colleen and
too.
Chuck,
Yeah.
for all your work on this.
Thank
You guys
you.
did a great job.
Thanks, Jim.
I think those two things, I think Dave implied that they go hand in hand. I find it hard to believe that we're going to come up with the ideal Haddonfield student, someone who wants to sit and memorize dates, right? And if that is, we have bigger problems to worry about. But I think once we decide that, once we establish that, and we're pushing the project-based learning, this is a perfect example. Why are we changing over this? We want our students to be, if we decide who the ideal student is, our profile, this will lead there. So I think they work well together. They go hand in hand. Gino, you want to talk about INRS?
Yep, I'm going to share my stuff very succinctly. 2 really focal points that I'm going to be working on this upcoming school year. One is really improving our multi-tiered system of supports, which is also called INRS. That's our pre-intervention and referral process by which we provide evidence-based interventions to students in the hopes that we prevent the need for a referral for special education. And there are 4 key points upon which I will focus. 1, improving coordination among the 5 buildings, enhancing early screening and response time for at-risk gen ed students, expanding our evidence-based interventions, and coordinating district-wide data collection on the effectiveness of our interventions. I do think when I look at our work over the past 7 to 10 years, we are in a much better place now than we were. However, I believe that we have significant room for growth, and there is that consensus that there among the teachers and among my administrative colleagues that change is needed in this area, as I just outlined. And the second real focus is going to be on expanding our social and emotional learning. I did provide a link, and I believe it's also on the website, our long-term SEL strategic plan, which spans 3 years. And I'll just give you a little bit of insight on a project we are currently working on. Is a formal relationship with Temple University's Child and Adolescent Anxiety Clinic, where Haddonfield would become a location for clinical interns to do their clinical internship in Haddonfield, working with our students as an added layer of social and emotional and counseling support for our students under the supervision of a clinical supervisor from Temple University. So that's something very exciting that we are looking for. And the other big push and pull we're trying to balance, as I alluded to in my earlier presentation, is the idea of how can we effectively and efficiently turnkey aspects of the ruler program to our students as quickly as possible while ensuring a high level of quality. So that's where we are.
One of the things that I think you alluded to this, but maybe you didn't, if I missed it. IRS, it used to be the onus was on the student, right? A student had difficulty. We sent an IRS. We told them how to be different students. We're flipping that right now. This is going to be the IRS now is on the onus of the teacher. You've got to change what you're doing for the kids. I don't know if you want to expound on that a little bit.
Well, it's not only that, but it's about what are the evidence-based interventions that you're providing, and to what extent have those interventions had any impact on the trajectory of the student's success. So that part of the question, we're still not there yet as being able to answer systemically across our district. And we're looking to take intervention plans that have goals that might look something like provide extra time, one-on-one student counseling, individualized support. 2, the student will be provided a multi-sensory writing-based program to improve their encoding skills by 75% compared to baseline data. Kind of taking from what we've learned in our special education world as far as progress monitoring goes, where we have made great strides in the past 2 to 3 years, and now bring that into our general education world through our intervention specialists, particularly at the elementary level.
And that's where the training comes in, right? Because a general ed teacher has never really been trained to do that type of collection. They're assessing and moving on. They're not pulling that data out.
That's correct. And we have leveraged some support through the New Jersey Department of Education, through their coordinator, through multi-tier systems of support, who has said they will be working with us, and also leveraging the expertise of our current administrators, namely Dr. Loren and Dr. Henderson, who have really done extensive, high-quality work in this area. So this gives me great excitement to really take on these 2 initiatives.
Great. Thank you, Gino. Any questions for Gino? All right, Mike Catalano, are you still with us? I haven't seen Mike in a while.
Yeah, I'm still here. I didn't fall asleep.
All right, there you go. Mike's going to talk about the business office. There's been some big changes up there. And I think it's probably a place, I don't know how familiar most of you are with it, but it looks much different up there than it did a year and a half ago, or even 6 months ago. So Mike's going to talk about that.
I'd like to point out, I actually had to change the theme of my presentation here twice because Chuck and Gino use them both. So, so I'm here to talk about the new mission of the business office. Okay, this is where we're going. So, if anyone knows who this is Milton. If you've ever seen the movie Office Space, you'll mainly be seeing Milton behind his desk like this, right? You see his desk is cluttered. He's always sitting back there. You see some antiquated systems, a lot of paper. Well, we're trying to move away from this being your stereotypical looking, business office view. Okay. So here's some of the things we're trying to do when it comes to refocusing our vision for the business office. Okay. It's more than just saving money. Of course, it's a big part of the job, but our first priority should be number one. Everything that we think about, the students come first, along with all the employees. Thinking about them with every decision we make. Our mentality is to do what's right for students, employees, but we also have to keep in mind, there's plenty of laws in New Jersey, right, and a lot of policies that we have to follow. So making sure we stay in line with all that. One of Chuck's favorite four-letter acronym, excuse me, is CUSAC, right? So, last time around with CUSAC, the initial time they came out, gave us a score. We didn't pass. Well, I'm trying not to let that happen again. Of course, we passed when they came up for their follow-up, but I'd like to get it right on the first try this time. Equity is something that we've been doing, but we want to stress this more than ever. And this is more than just part of the district's strategic plan, but this is also a county initiative too. And we have mid-year budget reviews where superintendent, assistant superintendent, business administrator, chief academic officer, we all meet with the county superintendent, county business administrator, and they look at me and say, what are you doing to address equity in the budget? So they're making sure that the business side of things is also trying to stay aligned with educational missions and strategic goals. Let's see. So to get to the sort of the next point here, making things as efficient as we possibly can. A sort of the term that I use is called process monitor, and what that means is always looking at how we're doing things and constantly thinking if what we're doing is the most efficient way to do it. Okay, so making processes better. For this last point, this is really for me, getting my butt out from behind the desk. I've got to see how the district actually works every day. My friends often call me a pencil pusher, but I'll tell you, I got a pair of work boots and a hard hat right next to my desk. So if I need to get out and go around the district to look at how things work, that's what I have to try and do and strive to keep doing. So I'm really trying to get to avoid having to be in the four walls of my office every single day. So these are a few things that are helping us support that plan. Okay. The first one is Kristen Sullivan. She's our new accounting manager. That actually brings us back to the full-time equivalent our office was 2 years ago. And going back to the point I had on the last slide, this helps me get out from behind the desk. She's also going to be someone who takes a real close look at internal controls and the efficiency of the office. You could almost say she's a jack of all trades. So that helps us, again, keeps us in line with, efficiency and giving me the opportunity to get out from behind the desk. Next is purchasing manual and standard operating procedures. The standard operating procedures is actually, going back to CUSAC, something we have to approve every year to be in compliance with CUSAC. The purchasing manual is actually on tonight's agenda for the normal board meeting. The SOP will be on August's agenda. But these are things to help guide and support compliance with fiscal accountability, and we share this with not just the business office staff, but all employees. These are on our website. Something else we do to help, again, I'm repeating myself, efficiency, is we let people know who's in charge of what in the business office. That way, if someone's reaching out to Gino about something and Gino just refers them to me, I'm just going to refer them to someone else. Well, why don't they just know who it's going to be from the get-go? Saves 20 emails in the process. So that's what we're trying to do to support our plan. So here's some examples of things we have done or are currently doing to help us get to the revision business office. Okay. Employee assistance program. So what an employee assistance program is, the general definition of it is, well, first off, that's on tonight's agenda also. But what an employee assistance program, aka EAP, that supports the well-being of our employees. They assist employees with personal problems and or work-related problems that impact their job, their health, and also their mental and emotional well-being. And I'm actually going to take 1% of the credit. Dr. Priola was really the a driver and spearhead of trying to get this started in the district. So I can't take all that credit. A lot goes to Gino too for getting it started. Another thing that we are is an example of what we're doing. So elementary and secondary school emergency relief, ESSER for short. It's also known as CARES Act funds. These are in light of COVID-19, these are funds that we were allotted. We have an allocation. We actually approved the allocation in the last board meeting. Our intentions for those funds is supporting instruction, plain and simple. In a little more detail, summer remediation and technology to help support instruction. Again, I'm sort of repeating myself. We're supporting instruction. Now, when we talk about equity, again, an example of how we apply that to the budget. Well, we try and make things proportionate that makes sense. So, for example, at the elementary level, we're not going to the supply budget for elementary school A. If they have 500 children at their school, and elementary school B has 400 children enrolled at their school, well, why would the supply budget line for elementary school B be higher than elementary school A? That just doesn't make sense. So we always look and make sure we're consistent and make things equitable in our budget. The last one is actually groundbreaking news to any administrator or professional assistant seeing this presentation, making things more efficient. We're going to finally start electronically delivering our purchase orders. So again, saving paper, postage, getting things places faster. We have vendors in Wisconsin, California, Texas. So getting POs out faster helps things move better. That's basically it. Any questions?
No, thank you, Mike. And one of the things that, and this is important for all of us, important for me, if you look back several years ago, our tech department was something of a bad movie, right? And John Miller came along, and they're a service industry now, right? They're there to serve the people, make sure the teachers have what they want, make sure that service is done. And not that long ago, I would say our business office cared little. I shouldn't say cared, that's value judgment. It didn't feel like they cared much about the people who worked in the district or the educational process. There's a much different feel already now. So you can tell that when people have to work with Mike or need to work with Mike or enjoy working with Mike, I should say, they're there to get things done. And Mike's question is, what do you need from me to accomplish what you need to do as an educator? 36 months ago, that was not the conversation. The conversation is you can't have this because. And I think that shifts a lot. And that says a lot about Mike and his attitude. And I think all those people up there following that line, just like all the John Miller's guys, are all very friendly, very service oriented, we know you need something. It's our job to make sure you have what you need. You can feel that up in Mike's office too now. So thank you very much for that, Mike. Nice job.
Thanks for sharing that, Chuck. That's really important. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. One last thing we wanted to talk about. I ran this by, and I think Adam, we might have been talking one day, and it came up after one of our committee meetings. We have board meetings. We know when they are, and we know how school cycles work, right? And we talk often about making sure people are aware of what's coming up in board meetings. But we tend to wait and figure out what's happening at board meetings 10 days before they start. We know in December and June, we're going to hear about HIB, right? We know that Mike's going to talk about budget in April and May. But we have strategic planning goals. We just talked about 3 new goals we're looking for. We have a lot of things that we do in a cycle that we know fall in certain times of the year. And I'm thinking it might be a good idea to try to establish those things. That we know the October board meeting is going to have a focus on school opening or whatever it's going to be. And we know that the January meeting is going to be focused on X, Y, or Z. I think if we have, I mean, obviously things are going to change if there's emergency pop up, but I think if we get into that cycle of knowing what's coming next, where we're focusing our energies for next month, I think it'd be beneficial for us, but I also think it'd be beneficial for people who might want to know. There are people who don't care about the budget, but care greatly about something else we may be talking about in June. And I think if we establish those things ahead of time, I think it would be a good way to start letting people know this is what we're doing, this is what's coming up next. And it's not, as it often is, 10 days ahead of time throwing an agenda together. So I'm just looking for thoughts on that. If people think that'd be a worthwhile venture. And then if we do, I can sit down with Mike and Gino and Colleen, and we can start looking at pull back board agendas for the last couple of years and see what tends to happen in November, what tends to happen in December.
Chuck, I think that's a great idea. I think one of the reasons that the board established the communication around board meetings is exactly that. It's the desire to get the word out to parents who are interested, but maybe weren't able to be at a meeting, but additionally let them know, and this is what's coming up next. So I love the idea.
Good.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea too. Are you thinking of like doing an annual like March budget? March we talk about the budget. April we talk about. I mean, I don't know how it would go. HIB, or so that people know, and for the full year, you at least get a picture of what will be highlighted, and then we make sure the presentations kind of for those particular topics fall in that month.
That was my thought.
Yeah,
right?
I think it's a great idea.
We could
Especially
say October is strategic planning updates, and when we can pick them and do those. I think that was my thought process, Jan.
Yeah, and then we as a board make sure that we annually are checking in on each of the major points of the district too. It'll probably help us all stay focused and updated on everything also. I think it's a great idea.
Two of the things that, if you don't mind me telling the 2 stories, security became an issue because, a few parents get together and decide, what's going on with security, and they rally people to get information. And we spoke with those parents, and they said, well, we want security to be spoken about at each meeting. So if we took every topic that we work on and talked about it for 15 minutes at each meeting would be 6 hours. So we said, why don't we talk about theme? The other thing is we've made promises as a board that this board inherited. We promised to maintain our facilities that we just spent $35 million on. And we put a small community group together to help guide us. And, they feel sort of abandoned because we've actually put some systems in place. But, that's one topic that at least once a year, we're going to dedicate some time, and we're going to bring Tim in and Mike in, and we're going to say, here's where we are. We bought software to help us monitor and report on where we are. But to have a predictability to it so that they don't have to be worried that it's February and they don't know. They know come April, we're going to have a conversation about facilities. So it gives the community predictability around topics. So if there's a topic the community is specifically interested, they know when to tune in and check it out. So great.
Yeah, on that also, it gives an opportunity for members of the community to see it coming up. So if they have questions of something they would maybe like addressed in a presentation, or, if they have particular issues, then they know well in advance that they could bring it up, or that would be a good month to kind of send us some questions about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chuck, I think one other benefit of that would be to work closely with the policy chair, because you could get on an annual review cycle and say if November is going to be security or something, you could have the policy committee focusing exclusively on security related policies, and then we're just reviewing security. We're all on the same page for that month with respect to the presentations that might be given, the policies that might be reviewed. And, you know, thinking long-term, 5-10 years down the line, it just becomes, you know, this is we're doing security review this month. So I think it's a great idea. And I think something that it will also mature and get things on a schedule.
All right. Anything
And
else?
I know we have our strategic goals, I know, online on the BOE website, but do we have any more information, like about the things that we're doing for each strategic goal available in one place? You know, online, I don't know if it would be a lot of work, but for example, I don't think this board or the administration gets all the credit for all the things, you know, that you're doing. I think you're doing so much more than the community even knows. So all the discussion on ruler, for example, under social and emotional learning, and I don't know if the community knows about that. And is it worth having in one place? If your issue is security, you know, you click on it and you see, oh, I understand there's a security committee that meets. Oh, I understand that you're looking at policies in December, or I just don't know if we have a website where people can get all this information that we put out on a periodic basis.
We do, Justin, and to the point you just made, if we don't talk about it at the board meeting, we just have a pile of stuff that we've done and no one sees it. If we know that we're talking about the strategic plan 3 times a year, that's 3 times a year we're updating that web page, or it's pushing that update of the web page. So yeah, we do have places for this, but it would really encourage people to go there and help keep it up to date and more current if we were talking about it and we knew we were talking about it in October and March and June, that type of stuff.
All right, good stuff.
Okay, anything else? Because I think John Miller says he needs 15 minutes to get set up for the 7 o'clock meeting.
So we're gonna, just for logistics, we're gonna close this YouTube broadcast down because this was the extended work session board retreat. We're gonna reopen our actionable board meeting at 7 o'clock on a separate broadcast, and we're going to go into a separate meet, or are we staying on this meet, the board, the actual board? Do you know?
Separate meet.
Separate meet, okay. So John did send information. You all have the links. So we'll close this down and pop up in the separate meet. And when we'll come back on at 7 o'clock. Was there, I didn't want to end it. I just wanted to get logistics. Chuck, did you have anything else?
No, that's it. That's good. I got to feed my dog too before the next meeting starts.
Yeah.